But if you look at nations like Israel, the startup nation, or any other advanced nation where the ecosystem is more mature, you will see that there's one startup for every 2,000 to 3,000 people. So we will go 10 times. Hi, I am Chintan Vaishnav. I am the Mission Director for Atal Innovation Mission at NITI Aayog, Government of India, and you are listening to Understanding the Future podcast.
Hello everyone, I'm Puneet Gandhi, Senior Associate with the Climate Center for Cities at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and welcome to the Season 3 of Understanding the Future podcast. I have been working and studying in the field of sustainability and climate change for more than 8 years, and I have realized that I have a lot of questions on how we can build cities in India that are more climate focused. With Understanding the Future podcast, I interact with experts, entrepreneurs, and government officials to understand what it takes to bring all the different solutions to the ground, as well as how can systemic changes be developed on ground. We will further anchor all the topics being discussed with different skill sets required. This will help us understand the future of cities and future of work in Indian context. If you are tuning in for the first time, do check out our previous episodes. Also, don't forget to check out the Climate Practitioners India Network, a members-led solutions-oriented platform for climate practitioners across India. And join it through the show notes. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Season 3 of Understanding the Future. I am your host Puneet Gandhi, Senior Associate with the Climate Center for Cities, and today we have with us Dr. Chintan Vaishnav. He is the Mission Director of Atal Innovation Mission at the NITI Aayog, and today he will help us understand the topic of developing cities as innovation factor. Welcome to the show, Dr. Chintan.
Thank you, Puneet. It's great to be with you.
So I think I'll start the question with what is Atal Innovation Mission? What is it trying to drive in India? How is it trying to drive? And what are the kind of impacts that have come out of it?
Sure. So Atal Innovation Mission is Government of India's umbrella or flagship initiative that is tasked with creating and nurturing the innovation ecosystem of the country, the innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem of the country. It sits inside the NITI Aayog, which NITI stands for National Institution for Transforming India. That is if you want to think of it this way, the think tank of the government, the central think tank of the government of India. And it has existed, that is the Atal Innovation Mission has existed since 2016, December. And so over the past few years, it has focused on several different activities to really accelerate the innovation and entrepreneurship movement in India. At the youngest end of the spectrum, we have built 10,000 tinkering labs, which are called the Atal Tinkering Labs or ATLs. These are maker spaces in schools for children from 6th to 12th grade. These spaces have 3D printers, mechanical and electronic desks, and so on. And it is perhaps the first intervention in Indian school setting where mind and hands have been given equal status in learning. We also have created incubation centers. These are generally, they're called Atal Incubation Centers or AICs. These are business incubators, typically hosted at a university or in an industry body or a research lab. The idea here is to promote startups, let somebody go from an idea to a startup. We've created 68 of them so far. We have a mandate of 101. We have just opened the application process for AICs, so people who want to apply, this is the time to do it. We have Atal Community Innovation Centers, which are new centers. This is a new scheme under which we are trying to build 50 community innovation centers, which are SDG focused, where grassroots innovators innovate and are supported in a serious way. This application is also open recently, so I think that there people can apply. We have built 14 of them so far. We're going to build 50 of them in total. Then we run challenges, national innovation challenges, where ministries give us problem statements and we run a challenge. We select startups, we support them for 12 to 18 months to bring their solution to market. So these are called Atal New India Challenge. In December last year, we announced a vernacular innovation program. This program is designed to open India's innovation ecosystem to all languages of India. As you know, there are 22 official languages in India, but much of our innovation ecosystem today remains accessible only to English speakers, which is only about 11% of all Indians. So that's the vernacular is the other work. And then we also, on top of this, we have many partnerships and ecosystem activities to sort of take the ecosystem forward. So a lot of this, these are just numbers so far that I've told you about, but you asked about what has been the impact of this, right? So we have recently done a cost-benefit analysis of Atal Innovation Mission as to whether it makes sense to have such a mission. I always ask in various crowds, why should we have an innovation mission? Can't it happen without one such mission? And I had been invoking that question more qualitatively by asking people that how many technologies can you count that you use, or your parents have used, or your grandparents have used, that you consider having originated in India. Yeah. And it's a very small number of technologies that we today depend on. So that's one clear reason to have an innovation mission to accelerate this movement. But this cost benefit, what it has shown us is that so far, until last year, we have spent 1,511 crore rupees on everything that we have spent for our innovation mission. If you calculate the returns, they are, and you only keep it to tangible returns. These returns are somewhere close to 8,700 crore rupees. But there's a 5-time gain. So benefits are 5 times the cost. Yeah. The way we have calculated the benefits is to add up the returns from startups, from incubators, and from having created the tinkering labs. For startups, our startups so far have a valuation of somewhere around 6,500 crore. That is 2,700 startups that are directly working with Atal Incubation Centers. Yeah. These incubators have raised somewhere close to 60 crores. This is mostly, infrastructure, matching fund type of a thing. So that's also a form of income. Startups have so far created about 15,000 plus jobs. If you take that a single job is somewhere close to 30,000 rupees a month, which is on the lower end, then that gives you about 500 crores per annum. And then we have sensitized 75 lakh students so far. And if you say that, if you ask the question, how much would such a student pay in a private setting to get similar experience? They would at least pay 1,000 rupees, very, very conservatively. So that gives you about 750 crores. So in total, we have 8,700 crores. So that's 1:5. So 5 times gain. But if you take one more step and you say, I will do what investors do, and I'm going to divide this number by a social cost of capital, then you will see that Atal Innovation Mission's returns are about 17 times, which would be in line with any globally well-executed program. Yeah. So that's where we.
Wow, that's a very good, concise thing that you have just spoken about everything that is possible under the Atal Innovation Mission. And somewhere, I think it's a buzz is also going around that somewhere close to 75,000 startups have registered in India right now. So, what are the kind of challenges that we are seeing right now that we need to solve going forward from now, that we can develop this kind of robust innovation ecosystem that you're mentioning, that yes, we need to make sure that every household can think of Indian innovations that they are using from now on?
Yeah. Well, so the challenge. Well, first of all, I think the 75 number thousand as a number is a great number to celebrate on one hand.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is about, in my rough calculation, about 1/10 of where we will eventually. I say this because if you look at about 70,000 startups for 140 crore people,
Yeah.
that is about one startup for 20,000 people.
Yeah.
But if you look at nations like Israel, the startup nation, or any other advanced nation where the ecosystem is more mature,
Yeah.
you will see that there's one startup for every 2 to 3,000 people.
Mhm.
So we will go 10 times. If we were equally creative, which I think we are,
Yeah.
we will go to that type of number. So the first thing to note is that this is a good number for us. We should celebrate it. But we should also know that this is 1/10 of the number we could have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what are some things that need to happen? What are the barriers? So the biggest barrier is mindset.
Yeah.
This is and I'm talking about various forms of divides that exist in terms of the mindset, right? It is whether it is between a parent and a child wanting to take risk and parent wanting them to take a job.
Yeah.
So that's one. Whether it's a mindset, whether it's a gap or valley between an academic faculty and an industrialist,
Yeah.
where industrialists by and large don't have the confidence that there can be, an entrepreneurial academic.
Yeah.
And academics often don't have the confidence that there can be sort of, there can be industrialists who are seeking depth and are willing to work with research-based findings and all that. So that's another. We have a similar type of a gap between private sector and the government. Again, these are the trust divides, right? I think that's so. The mindset is really, to me, the deepest impediment or barrier to moving forward quickly. But there are other more sort of operational, more tangible barriers. For example, investments are still very small, so startups who really succeed beyond a certain point often end up going abroad, because whereas an Indian investor is not willing to invest in them, somebody abroad is willing to invest in them. Take science-based entrepreneurship, for example. You look at the world's top 100 deep tech startups, the average investment in each one of them is about $75 million. That is the total budget of Atal Innovation Mission in the whole year. So you see the gap in funding that we are talking about. The other piece also is that, for the moment, a large number of startups are still in digital, mobile, IT type of space, whereas our challenges are all over the map. We have healthcare challenges, agriculture challenges, environmental challenges, so many different things that would need us to innovate not only in the digital space but also in the physical space, so in machines and materials and biology and nanotechnology and whatever else. So I think we're not yet going there.
Yeah.
And for a variety of reasons. Digital is easier to, it's more democratized, so more people can do it more easily and so on. So we have to overcome all of these.
Wow. Yeah, it's surely quite complicated per se, and I do agree with you that I think in India we do have a major IT sector focus any which ways. But somewhere I would also like to think that okay, if we already have such capabilities, can we target more towards the tech innovations? Can we bring in more companies which will be more future centric and maybe bigger than Google and Facebook? How can that kind of ecosystem be developed in India? Assuming that we have that kind of talent already in place.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So we have at Atal Innovation Mission last year, we undertook a very serious experiment with deep tech, where we had a program called the AIM Prime program, which was run in collaboration with Venture Center in Pune at the National Chemical Laboratory, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor. In this experiment, we selected about 22 startups, several incubators that supported these startups, and several academics whose labs these startups had come out of. And we took them through a 9-month acceleration process, in which the first 3 months were more instructional, where globally renowned faculty taught 1.5 to 2 hour type of session on the entire process of lab to land, and then building business models around such deep tech ideas. These were all deep tech ideas, by the way, or they were all ideas which originated in science. And so we took them through these instructions, and then for first 3 months, and then for the subsequent 6 months, we intensely handheld them to apply the frameworks that were taught in the first 3 months. And there were several opportunities to pitch, meet investors, etc. And we were, first of all, we learned a lot in terms of how to think differently for deep tech. So the way I like to define deep tech vis-a-vis any common startup is that a deep tech startup is one where there is a creation of knowledge in the process of doing the startup, as opposed to a mere application of knowledge, which is where most of the startups are. Of course, there's nothing wrong with mere application of knowledge. I'm just saying that this differentiation between the two, right? So when you are creating knowledge, obviously the scientific or the technological uncertainty is much, much greater, which requires you to have, first of all, support to fail much more and fail much faster. And also it's going to take sort of a lot of work to take it to market, because the as they say, the valley of death is not only deeper but it's wider. So for instance, in this cohort there was one startup called Lamara Technologies. Lamara had been working on their idea for 10 years. They make thermostable insulins so that the insulin drugs will not require cold chain. Now, this is a major breakthrough, right, if we can deliver it. But doing it requires 10, 12 years of hard work. So obviously it requires that kind of temperament and it requires that kind of patience for people who invest in it and so on. So I think in terms of deep tech, we are learning. We definitely have the talent, but we will have to build that patient capital and the support that the R&D needs, so that people can fail for a longer time because they are trying something harder.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one more aspect of deep tech, which is not adequately emphasized. How good our higher education system has a direct and deep relationship with deep tech.
Yeah.
Our discoveries are going to come only if we can teach our subjects in a way where such discoveries can originate. I'll give you a very quick example. For example, most of the world teaches programming languages by giving somebody a textbook and saying, listen, here is a syntax. Why don't you learn it? Why don't you practice a few examples and then you can write your code. You have learned programming language. That's okay for the mass market, but programming languages, the way they are taught in, for instance, in top places like MIT, is that when students come in their first class, they're given an old computer, the PDP-11 from 1970s, and are told that this computer only understands 5 different instructions, but you are required to write a code that delivers such and such outcome. Yeah. But because it only understands 5 instructions, why don't you first write your own language? So each student writes their own language. Once they do that, they're told, but listen, this computer doesn't really understand what your language is, so why don't you write an interpreter? So they use the 5 instructions to write an interpreter. Then they're told, why don't you write a compiler? Then they're told, why don't you write a... so when you learn languages in that fashion, any programming language of the world is a piece of cake for you, right? It's so easy for you to learn. And in the process, many ideas come to your mind as to why the modern languages or the state-of-the-art languages are still deficient.
Yeah.
That is what leads to new languages.
Yeah.
So the way these subjects are being taught has everything to do with what kind of inquisitiveness and intuition will come out of such people.
Yeah.
That we don't yet do.
Yeah.
We need to do that on a large scale.
Wow, that's quite fascinating. I think someone like me who does not understand computer languages might benefit from such a process to be actually able to, function out on, how to actually use these kind of languages. But coming to, I like your point about bringing in academic labs as well, because a lot of these kind of research require that kind of support for a long period of time. And we are looking at it. I think most of our cities have those kind of big labs because they have bigger institutes in place as well. But also traditionally, a lot of these cities are surrounded by a lot of MSME sector. Can there be a possibility of combining these two to be able to, lead in innovation sector so that more research can come out from the existing businesses and somewhere go more in depth with the innovation which can create a bigger MSME sector which is more research and innovation based?
Yes. Possibly the best way to invigorate and sustain applied research is to ground it in the industrial cluster, because then the research will be in response to a real demand. It will solve somebody's real problem, and it will also where the researcher will also receive regular feedback on whether what they're doing has any audience or not. So definitely, there's in places where there begins to be a functional system or an active interaction between MSMEs and research laboratories, a lot of meaningful progress can be made. One such example that comes to mind is if you look at India's history in terms of in the 50s and 60s, when in Ahmedabad the textile cluster set up NID, IIM Ahmedabad, Atira. These institutions work very closely with the textile cluster.
Yeah.
So first of all, the problem statements were much more real, and second, the output had a user.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely worth. There needs to be a lot more of that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And somewhere this, I think, also brings down the next question, that I think if we can, how can we then make sure that such kind of research facilities can also be placed with, let's say, government bodies like municipal bodies in each city? Because I think there is no dearth of problem statements over there, but there is a requirement of and demand of that kind of solutions. So how can that ecosystem be developed in a way that, or maybe connected across all three of them, to be made sure that, and I think somewhere this might also help us solve the larger questions of health and environment, as you had pointed out earlier.
So when you say all three, you mean the municipal body, the MSMEs, and the research lab?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yes, there is this program out of the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office on city clusters. They have selected 6 cities, each of which has more than 40 research institutions of national repute. And they're trying to interconnect them.
Yeah.
And also link them to the industries in that to the cluster. But see, cities is a very interesting unit of impact in some ways, because cities have the advantage of the concentration of people and activity.
Yeah.
So a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship is possible in cities at a much higher rate.
Yeah.
Because people are in closer proximity, and there's a critical mass of talent to do certain type of work and so on. So cities are very, in that sense, ripe for creating such platforms where problems can be solved actively. What we do see a lot of effort in this direction. For example, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs changed their policy to allow cities these smart cities to procure innovations from startups, which is a big step. So they've created the demand side of it. They're able to put up challenges to attract problem solvers to come engage with the cities and so on. But what we still don't do, which we can do, is that if cities were able to put out problem statements with which local research institutions can engage, and they can engage their students to solve those problems in a much more sustained and active way, not in a one-off hackathon, but in a innovation pipeline, if you would, where it is known that every fall semester or every spring semester every year there will be city challenges where students would engage and solve these challenges. Students from output of the previous years can be funneled into the next years. And so really take it up as that these are our sort of a 3-5 year strategy of my city,
Yeah.
and here's how I'm going to engage the young population to solve those problems. That kind of strategic framework we don't, at least I haven't yet seen.
Yeah.
And I think we definitely have an opportunity to build that at this point, especially because the innovation ecosystem, by and large, is at least, if you vibrant, maybe a very big word for it, but let's say at least it is shaken up sufficiently.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's a very important point as well. And I do know that MOA is trying to push this frontier as well to make sure that more and more innovation can be taken up. And I think somewhere it needs to come from the bottom as well on those lines. But then coming to the bottom of the pyramid, or let's say consumers or users of all these products, I think one of the biggest challenge that everyone is or everyone's afraid of is the consumer data. And how do we make sure, and what kind of benchmarks or standards can be made to make sure that this data remains safe so that anonymization or data leaks happen at the least possible or close to nil?
This is the consumer, you mean the city dweller?
No, consumer as in, this is from the general startup perspective of all startups do take up a lot of data of all different users. How do we make sure that that remains safe and that is protected from hacks and everything?
Yeah. So there are two aspects to it, right? One is the security aspect, data security aspect.
Yeah.
The other is the data privacy aspect.
Yes.
Which one are you thinking about?
I am thinking more on lines of data privacy.
Okay. Right. Right. So the privacy protection, I mean, if you look at, so the Data Protection Act would really be the best way to do that. The principles of what is to be protected are quite simple. Adhering to them is where the challenge is, right? Because of the variety of intentions and the pressures on the businesses and so on. A business pressure, regulatory pressure, whatever. The information that must be protected is the personally identifiable information, right? Then beyond that, there is this. There are the questions of, okay, did you collect the information that you absolutely needed? Are you using this information in the way that you promised you would use it and not beyond? And then are you disclosing this information to those only to those you had promised you would disclose to, and are you doing that responsibly? So these principles of how to design these innovations that deal with data are fairly well understood. The challenge comes when, in the absence of a regulatory protection or restrictions that the do's and don'ts that regulations sort of put out.
Yeah.
In the absence of that, firms can yield to pressures that violate the best practices. Right? That's the challenge. But again, there's no data and privacy protection in the absence of a data protection framework, which needs to be comprehensive. So, for instance, if you look at, and I think India has it's in a very, very good position to do something like this, because if you look at Sri Krishna committee's report, which was 600 plus pages or so, that has got to be one of the best documents written in this realm. I mean, if you look at the European discourse, you look at the American discourse on this topic, and I've shown this document to many people all around the world when I was researching data privacy in India, and I think our understanding of what needs to be done is very, very sound. Also, we are the only people in the world who have said that it's not all about locking somebody's data up, nor is it all about only commerce. It is about the balance between the protection and being able to innovate. We are the only nation in the world that is said, which is a very important thing, because the either extreme is not something we can afford.
True, and I think because the amount of people that we have as well, I think data somewhere can be a gold mine as well in terms of innovation that we want to bring up, for sure. So I think one of the last questions that I would like to pose is on the lines of that. There are now big problems that people are trying to solve, like climate change, and a lot of people kind of ask that, can we make things more open source on these lines? And something like FOSS India, a free and open source software platform that is there. Now, does it make more sense to develop this kind of ecosystem, considering that we need to also translate a lot of innovation into action and bring forward solutions to solve problems like climate? And maybe how can we develop this?
Yeah, that's a very tough and good question. Well, I think it's very, very, very unique. Two unique pieces that you're combining in this question. Well, one is the climate. What can we do about the climate? Second is, can we do it in an open source fashion, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, I think when it comes to climate, is that it unifies the whole world. That's one, just like COVID in some ways unified us all in. So climate is one such issue. In other words, if we innovated something that was a climate conscious innovation in India, chances are that it would be of interest to other countries out in the West, etc. Just because this is a common problem we're all facing. So that would then say that. So that's one, in a way, something that unifies us. Now, the rate at which we are going right now, I don't think we can solve these problems in isolation. So from that perspective, I think open source is an interesting proposition. That if something works for, say, climate adaptation or mitigation in one part of the world, should it be open source so that it can be used by any other part of the world? Of course, the answer is why not, right? But more pragmatically, I think we will be forced to leave aside profit maximizing business models around innovation, and build impact maximizing business models around innovations when it comes to climate change. That is absolutely true, because I think the rate at which we are solving problems is not nearly enough to meet the goals of, say, 1.5 degrees or what. So,
No, that's true, and I think with this challenge coming up, it's more and more evident that a lot of startups are also coming up in this sector to make sure that some kind of dent can be created. So I think the last question that we ask everyone on this is around skill set, because somewhere this is an interesting ecosystem. This is something which has a lot of excitement, a lot of ups and downs. But to put it in, because this is a very broad as well, so I would like to frame it in a way that what are the different skill sets that would be required to develop cities as an innovation factory for India?
Or if I kind of step back and think about that. One of the skill sets which is not very common is we will need people who can understand languages of many different domains, are tolerant to understanding different domains, because these problems in a city, problems are far more interconnected. In smaller area, a lot of people coexist. So to be able to work with one another, I think understanding languages of different domains is important to build impactful solutions. So that's one skill set that's required. Other than that, I think we will require a skill set to identify important problems, which is a very important point, by the way. I mean, we never teach people how to identify problems. We only teach them how to write up solutions. So identifying problems is one skill set. Second is creating. Design skills are going to be very important because you want to create a solution that's to that problem, which actually generates value for somebody, right? If it doesn't generate value for somebody, then why have to create a solution? And then you require skill set to say, okay, how do I take this solution forward in terms of at least creating some sustainable economic model around it, so that some of that value is captured to pay for taking such a solution forward for business models. I think that will be an important skill set. And then I think a lot of problems are going to be be such where you really have to solve it in a multi-stakeholder fashion. That's another negotiations, mediations, whatever you want to call it. All of that. Yeah. But again, I have to say, I am not an expert on this particular question. I'm kind of reflecting on it in real time. So here are some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it does make sense that from understanding of how it comes from defining problems to creating models and making sure that the adaptation is across different stakeholders. It does make sense from a design point of view that, okay, all the things that would be required to make sure that city can develop and fulfill the requirements of citizens as well. But thank you so much. It has been wonderful talking to you. And thank you for answering such questions, because I think this does bring in a lot of clarity also on the lines of, okay, what are we actually looking at it from innovation terms? What is government looking at it from innovation terms? And how are we planning to move forward?
Thank you so much, Puneet. Thanks for posing some questions that have made me think more, and I will continue to brew them, especially the last question. That what is unique about creating a skill set in a city so that cities can be better, prosperous, sustainable, whatever. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, and have a good Independence Day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Do subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and follow us on all social media channels. For more details about the Climate Center for Cities and registration on Climate Practitioners India Network, click on the link in the show notes. The episode is conceptualized and produced by Puneet Gandhi. A big thank you to the whole team at C-Cube and NIUA for supporting the development of the podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode.